Hello Maniacs, and welcome back to a new season of Cult Classic Mania. I hate to start off this episode this way, but we unfortunately lost the great Larry Cohen. Larry Cohen, to me, he was the pinnacle of B-horror directors, and as a kid, I enjoyed the Tobe Hoopers, the John Carpenters, the George A. Romeros of the world, but I wanted something more with my horror, and then I found Larry Cohen. Larry, to me, he seemed like he was passionate about horror, and Larry was also able to convey complex issues into simple terms, but also be able to grab the viewer's attention with amazing visual concepts. If you're new to Larry Cohen, I highly recommend going back and checking out his older films. I really suggest watching Phone Booth or Q, The Winged Serpent, as well as The Stuff, which is what we're doing this week. But, it sucks that I'm having to do this tribute, but I'm also happy that I'm paying my respects to him, potentially gaining new fans for after the fact. But this man was a goddamn legend. He did a lot for me as a kid. I didn't know it at the time because I didn't realize he was Larry Cohen and that I was watching his movies. I just enjoyed the movies. But rest in peace, Mr. King Cohen. And this episode is for you.
In peace.
Oh, yeah. Hey, fuck ass, give me a beer.
Yeah, welcome back to the cinema. This is not for the typical. Time to feed the occipital lobe with the films that I call my home. Buckle up, settle in, while we break it down a bit. Got a new take, make an old film relevant. About to give attention to the unsung revenants of the film industry. That's a wrap, let's riff.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Cult Classic Mania.
Hello Maniacs, and welcome back to a new season of Cult Classic Mania, a podcast dedicated to the low-budget disasters that we all know and love. Not all of them are low-budget, but they definitely can and be disasters. I'm your host, Matthew, and boy, oh boy, it seems like it's been a long time since I posted a new episode. I know it's only been a week, but it seems like it's been forever. And for just now tuning in from cultcelebrities.com, welcome. I hope you enjoy the show. This week we're talking about The Stuff from 1985, directed by the late and great Larry Cohen. You can go ahead and follow the show on Twitter at CCMPod or on Instagram at Cult Classic Mania. If you feel like supporting us monetarily, you can go ahead and do so by going to patreon.com/Cult Classic Mania. I went ahead and updated the Patreon page to add a few more perks, and I do plan on getting stickers made in late May most likely, so be on the lookout for that. Like I mentioned before, I will be covering The Stuff from 1985, and god damn it, I love this movie so much. It's one of those films that I can never get tired of. I've seen it at least 100 times at minimum, and it's just, I still love this movie to this day. It's easily one of my top 5 favorites, and if you feel like watching it, you can go ahead and do so by going to Shudder. If you don't have a Shudder subscription, I highly recommend it. It's like $4.99 a month. I just now got my subscription, and they've been around for a long time, but I did not realize how amazing this service was. I can watch Phantasm, Brain Damage, Frankenhooker, Rumpelstiltskin, the fucking Stuff, all of that, in one night for a $4.99 price. I'm not sponsored by them, but that service is fucking amazing, and I'm glad someone came up with this idea. You can also check out the film for free on YouTube, and there's also a comedic commentary that you can check out. But you know what? Fuck it. Stop this podcast. Go ahead and get a Shudder subscription, $4.99 a month, and watch The Stuff at least 100 times minimum, and then come back, resume this podcast, and just bask in the glory of how fucking amazing this movie is. But The Stuff is directed and written by the one and only Larry Cohen, starring Michael Moriarty from Law & Order, Paul Sorvino from The Goodfellas, Law & Order, and Reservoir Dogs, Andrea Markovic, she is known from The Front and General Hospital, as well as Garrett Morris from Saturday Night Live and Coneheads. Do you guys remember Coneheads? I know it wasn't supposed to be a scary film at all, but when I was a kid and I saw those fucking Conehead people, they freaked me the fuck out. Same with Mars Attacks. Like, I know the Mars Attacks was supposed to be funny and hilarious, but god damn it, those Martians gave me nightmares as a kid. But The Stuff was released June 14th, 1985, with an estimated budget of $1.7 million. You already didn't know what The Stuff was about. The Stuff is about basically a delicious gooey ooze from the earth. Is marketed as the newest dessert sensation, but the tasty treat creates zombie-like creatures who only want to consume more of the dessert at any cost, even if it infects the entire world. But before I get into the stuff, I'd like to get into a new segment which I like to call Well,
Trivia time.
That's right, the new segment I am introducing is Trivia Time, where basically I break down my favorite trivia tidbits of whatever film I plan on doing for that week. So without further ado, let's dive into some trivia, shall we? So, did you know there were different types of foods and products disguised as stuff? Everything from yogurt to a made-up foamy substance that was used as fish bones to create what we know as the stuff. Usually, whenever it was time for somebody to actually eat the stuff, it was just, plain old yogurt or sometimes ice cream. There was nobody, except for one scene where Jason actually had to use shaving cream to basically fake out his parents that he was actually eating the stuff. For those that have seen the film already, do you guys remember the motel scene where Nicole and Mo were staying at for the night? Did you know that actual set was all an upside down set? Like whenever Mo is, not Mo, but the other guy that's trying to attack Mo, and he ends up being stuck to the ceiling from the stuff. That entire set was an upside down set because, mind you, this was the 80s, so they had to have all practical effects, and they had to make it look like he was actually stuck through the wall. So they created an entire upside down set just for that one scene. And later on, I believe it was Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it was Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where there's that bed. They're showing the view of the bed, and there's like a giant gaping hole, and blood is spewing out. They actually do that with that same exact set. They just basically recreated the stuff set. And we all remember Jason's asshole brother in the film, right? They're actually related in IRL. So Jason and Brian, well, his real name is Brian, and it's both Scott and Brian Bloom, and they are related. That's why it seems like their chemistry is so great, and the brother bonding is there. It's because they're actually related, so I thought that was pretty cool to find out. Also, Chocolate Chip Charlie, who happens to be my favorite character in the film. He was the mascot and head of the organization of the stuff, and that role originally was supposed to go towards Arsenio Hall, but the role went to Garrett Morris instead, because apparently Garrett Morris at the time was more popular, and he was a part of the original cast for Saturday Night Live. Arsenio Hall, they kind of bit the bullet on that one because he started to go on as a very famous comedian later on in life. And speaking of Garrett Morris, it seemed like the stuff would be a fun set to work on, but apparently whenever Garrett Morris was asked about the film, he said the production of it was just overall batshit crazy. I believe the quote was, he was like, I remember my parents always telling me this, if you didn't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And that was in response to if he enjoyed working with Larry Cohen. Because, god damn it, as much as I love Larry Cohen, he is a madman. I love him so much, don't get me wrong, but it's just, he was a madman when it came to directing. Did you know Ron Weasley himself, Rupert Grint, he is a huge fan of the stuff? That's right, he puts this in his top 5 favorites of all time, and he thinks it's the most original horror film he's seen in a long time. Are you guys tired of my trivia yet? The stuff, like I mentioned before, it was made on a $1.7 million budget, and a lot of the set was reused for A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Now, people are going to get mad at me for this, but I don't really like A Nightmare on Elm Street. But according to Larry Cohen himself, he has said it's been reused on multiple accounts for Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Enough of the trivia, let's go ahead and dive right into the stuff. The stuff starts out with a railroad worker outside walking around, and he notices that the snow is pulsating. So naturally, he sticks his fingers down into the ground where the snow is, and he attempts to grab a fingerful to take a bite of it. But first, he goes ahead and sniffs it. It's like, doesn't smell weird or at all. And then he goes ahead and eats the snow. And just, again, that's his first instinct, really. Like, you notice the ground is pulsating, and the first thing you try to do is try to eat it. And then another railroad worker, he comes by and tells him to stop eating the snow like any adult would. And then the guy that ends up eating the stuff, he begs the other railroad worker to go ahead and try it, see if he likes himself. And they're like, this is the greatest stuff in the world. They need to send this out and market it in all the grocery stores that they can find. And later, I believe it was later that night, it cuts to the title card sequence. And we are introduced to Jason, who is played by Scott Bloom. He wakes up in the middle of the night because he was hungry. And what do you know? He walks downstairs to open the fridge, and the stuff is moving around because they're already sends it out. It's already on the shelves in grocery stores everywhere. And his father runs downstairs because he thought Jason was a burglar. And his father is a complete asshole. His entire family's terrible. I mean, Jason's father is such an asshole. Like, he is so upset that Jason is downstairs eating food. He acts like Jason just shot the family dog. Because he's like, why the fuck are you down here? I can't believe it. You startled this entire family. Go back upstairs right now. Blah, blah, blah. And he's just so pissed off about it. And it's like totally unnecessary of how he's reacting. And again, there isn't a whole lot of continuity at this point. But we're being shown a commercial for this stuff. And throughout pretty much every scene, you get some sort of marketing ploy for the stuff to sort of like push that consumerism like Larry was trying to convey. And they're showing the commercial like I mentioned. And then it cuts to a group of businessmen who are on a boat discussing the stuff, saying it was difficult to get a hold of the company that was actually behind it. And all of the FDA members who approved of the stuff mysteriously disappeared. They were either on vacation or they just happened to retire after the approval of the stuff. And David Mo Rutherford, who is played by Michael Moriarty, comes in to talk about how he is going to spy on the company that makes the stuff. He's sort of like a private investigator for big businesses in a way. And first, Mo tries to play off as this dumb ex-FBI agent. And Mo, he tries to play off like he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he's actually really smart as a businessman and as a PI.
Oh, I'll be a son of a bitch. You know, Mr.
Rutherford, Mo Rutherford. You know why they call me Mo?
No, why?
Because every time people give me money, I always want Mo.
And anyway, he goes ahead and collects the info for the job that he's needed to do, and he collects the check, and it goes off. But before he leaves, he goes ahead and he punches one of the businessmen in the face. This businessman was mocking him from before, and I had mentioned before going into the scene that there was a stuff commercial being played, and they do this throughout the film. And I guess Larry himself, he wanted to play commercials in real life of the stuff on actual public access television, but the production company ended up saying no to that because it would just end up costing way too much. Because back in the day, I'm sure commercials cost a ton of money to make. After Mo punches him in the face, it cuts back to Jason's house where the family is eating breakfast. Nothing really notable happens except for Jason's brother, who again is played by his actual brother, Brian Bloom, tries to eat the stuff, but Jason, he freaks out and he warns him not to eat the stuff. And all of his family are so attached to the stuff. And again, they're assholes too. They're just terrible people. And they're just like, oh, you're wrong, Jason. It's good. Everybody eats the stuff. You just can't get enough. Anyway, we are met with Mo again, and he is heading to a science lab. And it looks like the scientist is Gene O'Neill. They're discussing what the stuff is and how it was created. And what I do like about the scene is they try to give us enough pseudoscience to where we should care about what's going on. Unlike where Chud, they don't give any pseudoscience whatsoever, and they don't tell us why the Chud is being created in the first place or why it even matters. But a good example, I guess, if you could, with these type of style alien horror movies, whatever, I guess a good example would be The Thing, how they give us a lot of pseudoscience to tell us why the Thing is actually becoming into other people in a way. But again, it cuts to another stuff commercial, but this time the stuff commercial is actually in the process of being created, and Mo ends up interrupting the set of the shooting to talk to the director of the commercial, and he plays off as he's like the manager of a fake petroleum company, I guess, whatever, and he was saying that he wants to invest in the director's business basically. And all of this, he's explaining what he's wanting to do, like just investing with her. And Jason, he is at the grocery store, destroying all of the stuff containers that are in the store. And it's saying it's going to kill everyone. Eventually, the employees, they end up holding him down. And before that happens, Jason, he starts to run down the aisle of the grocery store. And he notices an African-American boy sitting in the car, shopping with his mom. And he's eating the stuff like it's nobody's business. But Jason, he goes up and runs up to the kid and smacks it out of his hand. I was like, oh no, is this going to be a racist moment? I don't want it to be. I love this movie way too much for it to be a racist movie. And he ends up not. He's just trying to protect the kid. He's like, don't eat the stuff. It's bad for you. And he just runs out. and just destroys everything in the store that has anything to do with the stuff. Like, I would hate to be the employees that day. Like, that fucking kid, I know he means well, but those employees are probably like making $5 an hour, because that's probably minimum wage back in the day, and he's just fucking everything up, and the employees are just like, come on, man, it took me like 4 hours to do that stupid stuff display, and you're just destroying everything that I worked on. Let's not ruin my day just for your little antics or whatever. But fuck it, whatever. While this is happening, meanwhile, Mo is interviewing an employee from the FDA, and he's an FDA person who has been working there for at least 20 years or so, as he mentions, and he's interviewing him for a fake magazine company that apparently Mo works for. But again, he does this throughout the film. He makes up all these fake personas and all these fake companies to sort of mask that he's trying to gather information on the stuff. And this FDA agent, he apparently approved of the stuff, and he won't mention how it's made because Mo is just antagonizing him. He's just like, how's it made? Do you know what the stuff is? And, like just all these questions. And the FDA agent ends the interview when Mo notices the stuff is stashed in another room. He's like, oh, I forgot to lock that door. And the FDA agent is acting really strange, and Mo ends up leaving. But this is when the dog is being taken over by the stuff, attacking the FDA agent. Because, again, he was the first one to change to the attacking of the stuff. Mo ends up getting nowhere with the interview, so he heads off to a town called Stater, Virginia. And he stops to get gas, and while he's stopping to get gas, he is talking to a strange older gas station attendant. And he starts acting weird whenever Mo tries to interview him a little bit. And he gets weirded out, and he runs out into the woods. And Mo's trying to like just explore the town a little bit. And we are met with Chocolate Chip Charlie for the first time, who's played by Garrett Morris. And he introduces himself by jumping out and attacking Mo and punching him in the face. They have a weird standoff, and then Chocolate Chip Charlie stops, and he explains that he was a part of the creation of the stuff, but he was fired from the organization, and he's apparently investigating them now as well. So him and Mo team up, and this is when they go check out the post office and interview the postman, who's played James Dixon. And he eventually gets taken over by the stuff later on. He starts to act really strange, and then he goes off into the back room. But then we start to learn that he's getting taken over by the stuff. And Mo and Chocolate Chip Charlie, they go to look after him because, he ran off. And they notice that he is being taken over. They're just like, we're getting the fuck out of here. These people are acting weird, and I don't want to be around them. And they leave the post office. But soon enough, they are met with the townspeople of Stater, Virginia. And they have been infected by the stuff, and this is when Mo starts to fight them off. Chocolate Chip Charlie and Mo get away and on a boat, and they head to a diner nearby. Mo wants to split off with Chocolate Chip Charlie and tells him to go ahead and head off to D.C. to talk to a Frank Hooper about what's going on with the stuff, because he's the only other person that's been able to witness it. And Frank, he is another FBI agent that was friends with Mo. And while this is happening, Mo heads off to New York City to talk with the distributor of the stuff. The main owner is telling him to basically let go of the investigation and not talk about it anymore, and attempts to bribe him with only $1,000. Well, in '85, it's probably a lot of money actually, so I won't harp on that too much. But later on, Mo meets up with the commercial director from earlier, and I forgot to mention her name was Nicole. And they head to the lab, and the scientist mentions that there's a story in the newspaper about Jason destroying the supermarket stuff display. So naturally, Mo, he heads off to see Jason with Nicole to interview him about what's going on with the stuff in his town. Later that night, we learn that Jason is grounded from destroying all of the stuff displays from the grocery store, and naturally so. And he goes downstairs from his room to check on his family, see what they're doing. And his entire family is enjoying the stuff. They're enjoying the hell out of it. Just like from this morning, he warned his entire family not to eat it because he saw it moving in their fridge. It is like, guys, don't eat this. There's something wrong with it. Food shouldn't move, and no food should ever move. And his father goes on to say that all food and organisms move if you look at it close enough under a microscope. Like, are you fucking kidding me? And Jason just looks at him. He's just like, he has that look like, are you fucking kidding me right now? Are you serious? Whatever. And then Jason, he attempts to run away, and Brian, his brother, he quickly runs after him, and they force him to eat the stuff. But as he's handing the container, he quickly runs up to the bathroom to throw it down the toilet. And as he's throwing it down the toilet, he notices that it starts to move, and he's like it's trying to escape from the toilet. And this is when Jason, he attempts to run away from the house as the family runs after him. Because again, he's like, oh, I love this stuff, and he walks down the stairs. And before that happened, he filled the container with shaving cream, and he's like fake eating it. He's like, oh, I love this stuff, and he walks down the stairs, and like they're like, oh, Jason, it looks like you love the stuff now. I knew you would cave in, but it ends up being shaving cream, and that'll matter later on. But and then they end up chasing after him, like I mentioned. The family is chasing after Jason. Mo just happens to pull up next to him and tells him to get in the car. And as they're driving down the road explaining what's happening, Jason, he proceeds to throw up in the car, and he's like, yeah, sorry, but I just threw up in your car. And he's just like, what? Why'd you throw up? What happened? Did you eat the stuff? And he's like, well, kind of. I just ate shaving cream. And then Mo's response, well, we have to eat shaving cream every once in a while, kid, so I understand. I'm like, no, what? Who says that? Who says that as a daily saying? Oh, we eat shaving cream every once in a while. Whatever. And they head off. They go to the airport too, because earlier they were mentioning that they were going to the factory to talk to all the other employees about the stuff. And this is when he meets up with Nicole again. And this is when Mo, Jason, and Nicole head off to the stuff factory. And Mo and Nicole head off into a limo while Jason is waiting in the plane. Nothing really notable happens at this point, except for the stuff ends up getting onto the plane and ends up killing the pilot while Jason tries to run away in response. And he ends up finding the old factory where the stuff was made after they built the new factory. Meanwhile, later that night, Mo and Nicole, they head off to a motel for the night. And another stuff commercial ends up coming on at this point. Again, every other scene, they pretty much play a stuff commercial.
We're in Andre's exclusive continental restaurant, which caters to only the most discriminating clientele.
How's the food, sweetheart? That's nice.
Where's the stuff?
The stuff is here now. Great new taste sensation. Light and free now. Gives you elevation. Enough is never enough. Enough is never enough of the stuff.
The stuff, the taste that makes you hungry for more. The stuff, the taste that delivers.
Enough is never enough. Enough is never enough.
And this is the infamous motel scene. The stuff is starting to overcome Mo and covers his face, and Nicole ends up getting it off his face, but another man runs in from another room apparently and tries to attack Mo, but the stuff ends up overcoming the guy that was attempting to attack Mo, and the entire motel room just engulfs into flames. And again, this is one of those famous upside down sets where they're trying to make him look like he's hanging from the ceiling without making it too fake, I guess. But again, it was upside down set where they're trying to make him look like he's hanging down. And Nicole and Mo end up running out and stealing some guy's truck. And apparently Mo knows how to hotwire a truck, so he's like, all right, it's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just hotwire this truck, and we're going to get the hell out of here. Also, Nicole is so worried about being arrested for stealing the truck. Like, are you fucking kidding me? This pulsating yogurt-like stuff almost killed you, and you're worried about being arrested for stealing a truck. Are you serious right now? But whatever. Meanwhile, this is happening. Jason is leaving the factory inside a tanker truck, and they follow the tanker to where they siphon the stuff to distribute it. And Mo ends up hearing Jason in the tanker, and he attempts to save him. And this is when he drives off with the tanker, and this is when Nicole also attempts to leave in another site. But the worker, who is apparently overcome by the stuff, attempts to kill her. They end up leaving, but they end up saving her, and then they end up leaving. But the police, they attempt to pull them over, and they fake it. Nicole and Jason, they end up faking the stuff to distract the cop. And this is whenever they ask the cop to come over and try the stuff as well, because they noticed the truck was leaking. And this is when Mo runs up behind the policeman and ends up attacking him and killing him. They head to Colonel Spears' house, Castle, if you will, who is played by Paul Sorvino. And they are quickly met with this crazy army, but they let him pass. And the Colonel reminds me of a older Alex Jones. He's a crazy conspiracy theorist who apparently hates liberals and colored people as well as commies, because he makes a point of all three minority groups, and he hates all of them. But whatever, it doesn't matter. Mo and Spears talk it over about what's going on with the stuff, and Mo wants him to help out in taking down the stuff factory, basically. So him, Mo, Spears, Jason, and Spears' army, along with Nicole, they head off to the factory. And the driver that's driving them, he claims that he found the truck that was stolen off the side of the road. And the worker ends up shooting the driver. And this is when Spears jumps out and shoots the worker. And it's really fucking gross. Like, he turns into the worker that they're trying to talk to. He's like, turns into the stuff after Spears shoots him. He's like, I know I kind of like blood. And Spears is like, I kind of like blood, but that's the grossest shit I've ever seen in my life. And this is when the employees apparently all killed themselves as they run into the factory to kill off all the men. And meanwhile, this is happening. Nicole and Jason, they run downstairs, and the stuff is chasing after them as this is happening. And this part really reminds me of the Blob. Anytime the stuff is coming up towards whenever it's coming up towards Jason or Nicole or anybody, it reminds me a lot of the Blob and how it just slowly creeps in on them. They're just like waiting to see what happens. And again, while this is happening, it runs the stairs and all this is happening. And after they notice the bodies are on the floor, Spears has a plan to broadcast to the world on what the stuff can do and what it's all about. And apparently at this point, we learn that Spears has his own radio show, and Nicole wants to admit that it was her fault for basically promoting the stuff and putting it out on the market. But Mo is kind of hesitant about it. He's like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you doing that because that would kind of ruin your career. And I mentioned that earlier that Chocolate Chip Charlie just disappears and we don't see him ever again. But this is when he comes back up during the practice reading for the broadcasting while this is happening. And apparently Spears thinks he's a commie. And he also calls him a colored person. He's very racist apparently. And he makes an important note of that. And it's like, are you commie? I don't want you making any commie messages on the radio if you're wanting to participate in this broadcast. I'll shut it off immediately. Oof, this movie did not age well with those terrible jokes. And Nicole and Chocolate Chip Charlie, they go off to another room to practice the broadcast lines. And this is when Chocolate Chip Charlie turns into a stuffy. And it's so gross. I love it anytime someone turns into a stuffy because it just eats their body from the inside out. It's just destroying everything that we knew about that person. And part of the stuff that's leaving Chocolate Chip Charlie's mouth, it gets on Nicole's face, but Mo is able to save them both. Because at this point, Jason, he notices what's going on and runs into the booth. But the stuff starts to overcome him a little bit, and then Mo runs in, breaking the glass of the studio, and ends up coming in and saving the day. As everything starts to wind down and everybody's saved, Spears and Mo go on air to say that this stuff is harmful. And there is a montage of everyone just destroying the stuff. And this is very reminiscent of me whenever I was a kid and watching the news. I remember, I think it was like the late 90s, early 2000s. It happens every decade or so, where parents will get mad and destroy their kids' CDs and say that heavy metal music is bad for you. You shouldn't listen to it. You shouldn't play violent video games. And all this mass consumerism is bad for you. You're terrible. Shame, shame, shame. You shouldn't do this. And it really reminded me of that. And also, at this time, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, but this is sort of around the time where, VHS stores started to come about and you can be able to rent movies for once. And this is when CDs were starting to become a thing and it was being produced at mass rates. And this is when fast food started to get popular and junk food and everything. Like, we're just consuming all of this stuff at such a rapid pace, even more so than ever before. And they're playing more on it with the junk food, but there's also the entertainment aspect where we're just mass consuming and everything. And Larry Cohen, he really wanted to make that a point that we're just so we're such a consumption-based society that it's just maddening. And there's this craze where we're being killed off by killer yogurt as a metaphor for mass consumption. And while this is happening, it also cuts to Nicole admitting that she's sorry for ever advertising the stuff or being a spokesperson for it. And the gang goes back to the executive office from earlier, whenever he was trying to ask him about what's in the stuff or whatever. And this is when the executive is trying to talk to Mo about how they're basically rebranding the stuff, and they're only the new stuff is only going to have 12% of the original ingredients from before. And they basically force him and his assistant to eat the stuff. And as they're eating the stuff, they hear sirens in the distance going to, I'm assuming that they're trying to arrest the executives. I'm not entirely sure. You can basically assume it at that point. And the movie ends by a group of criminals doing a back alley deal of getting the stuff. And I love that they tie this. I love how Cohen somehow tied prohibition within it too. It's just fucking great. I love this movie so much. God damn it. Even though it's super dated, it's such a fun watch. And I know I keep saying it, but god damn it, I love this movie so much. I love Cohen's work, and I love how, especially with the stuff, he was trying to convey a sophisticated subject without trying to overly complicate things to where we can understand it and make it a fun viewing experience as a regular moviegoer. And he was able to do that perfectly. Like, we still deal with mass consumption today. It's just not as a rapid pace as it was in the 80s. It's not as new as it was in the 80s. But it's still kind of a relevant movie despite the super dated jokes about commies. And at one point I didn't write it in because it just seemed super offensive. And he's just like making Vietnam jokes. I'm like, come on, man. I don't want to quote that. It's super dated. But other than that, it seems like a fairly relevant topic just to talk about mass consumption today. But yeah, that was the stuff from 1985, directed by the one and only Larry Cohen. And it fucking sucks that he's gone, but you know what? He made his mark on the horror genre, and I really recommend checking out his older films because he is a king, and I will forever enjoy his films even when he's gone. And it's just check his movies out. You won't be disappointed. Even if, like I said, even if you have Shudder, go ahead and go on Shudder and check out his movies. I know Q, The Winged Serpent is on there. I don't know if Phone Booth is on there. I haven't checked yet. I just saw Q whenever I was looking through the list. But yeah, go ahead and check his films out. I highly recommend it. But yeah, enough about that. I am very excited to be back for season 2. It seems like that break was more than a week, but you know, I'm excited to be back, and I'm very optimistic about season 2. I'm excited about the movies that I'm going to be doing. I think you guys will too. I already had the month of April planned out, and no, we aren't doing April Fool's Day for April 1st. We're doing this stuff because fuck being trendy and fuck being cool, I guess. If you call April Fool's Day a trendy movie or not. But also, if you're into the new segment, Trivia Time, go ahead and hit us up on Twitter at CCMPod. Just let us know what you think of it, or you can hit us up on Instagram at Cult Classic Mania, and just let us know, hey, did you like the segment? Did you not like it? Tell me what you hated about it. But it's just a lot of fun researching more into the film and just doing a deeper dive, if you will, to see what I can find about this film. And there's a whole hell of a lot of other trivia that I could have added, but man, there is so much. If you want to, Trauma, I believe, their YouTube channel, they have an interview with Larry Cohen. That's where I got a bulk of my information from. But go ahead and check that out, and also Wikipedia if you want to, but I don't really trust Wikipedia anymore after all the bullshit that I tried for season 1. But yeah, go ahead and do that, and I'm going to be adding another segment later on. I'm not going to tell you which, but I'm just sort of easing them into you, just sort of not throw it all at you at once. I feel like I'm rambling on way too much, and I'm very rusty behind the mic since I haven't recorded in a week. But with all that being said, you can go ahead and follow the show on Twitter at CCMPod. You can follow us on Instagram at Cult Classic Mania. And if you feel like supporting us monetarily, you can go ahead and do so by going to patreon.com/Cult Classic Mania. And thank you, as always, to Petra Vita Music for the theme song. I really do appreciate it. You can go ahead and check his album, June Flower, on SoundCloud, and I believe he's on Spotify, or wherever you stream your music from, and I will leave those links down below in the show notes as always, and go to check those out for your viewing pleasures if you feel like it. With all that being said, I am your host Matthew, and this has been another installment of Cult Classic Mania. Talk to you all next week.
Hey, fuck ass, give me a beer!
Yeah, welcome back to the cinema. This is not for the typical. Time to feed the occipital lobe with the films that I call my home. Buckle up, settle in, while we break it down a bit. Got a new take, make an old film relevant. But to give attention to the unsung revenants of the film industry, that's a rap, let's riff.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Cult Classic Mania.